All right.
All right. Welcome, Mike. Thank you for having this session with us, another session for the Unconference. Um, as some or maybe all of participants know by this time that all our sessions are sponsored by Givet, Commons Stack, um, Giga, and Giveth. So this is a great moment for having this conversation, how Web3 can solve the problem of public goods. I think that's a very nice topic. And well, let's start diving in this topic. Why not? Welcome, Mike. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you so much for this beautiful introduction. Let me share my screen really quickly. Um, one sec. Let's see if it works. Okay. Um, Let me just know if you can see the screen.
Yes, we can. I can see the screen. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So the topic today for our discussion is how crypto can solve the problem of public goods. And the bigger question is, well, we all know what public goods are. I'm sure we've heard this a million times. We have this chart of non-excludable, non-rivalrous, excludable goods, and obviously public goods are non-excludable and non-rivalrous. What exactly does it mean? It means that no one can, if you use this a public good, no one else can prevent you from using it, and also you're not competing with anyone for that good. So if you use it, someone else can also use it at the same time. Now, where do public goods kind of fit in the bigger picture of the economy? That's kind of an important question. And I think this chart it illustrates it well. It's not something that many people think of, but when we think about the market and when we think about what people actually want, um, this is kind of what we get. On the one hand, you have the market, and it creates a lot of things that people want, but it also has negative externalities. And on the other hand, there's things that people want, but the market doesn't produce it. Um, it could be scientific research, it could be just art production, a lot of things that um, it's just not economical to produce. And it's not that it's generally um, not economical, just within the market mechanism. So let's just kind of dive a bit deeper into this. Um, why is there this misalignment between what people want and what the market produces? So it has a lot to do with the actual mechanism of the market. And the mechanism is an exchange mechanism. So if we think about scarce goods, if one person has produces a bunch of apples, someone else wants an apple, there's an exchange, and then the first person gets the money, the other person gets the apples or that one apple. Everything works fine. And then the next generation of this person can sell like the apple, or this person can sell the apple. That's not a problem. When we have abundant goods, that's a different issue. So if a person has like music or some idea that he wants to sell in the market, um, then in the first generation you can exchange the idea or the music or digital content or whatever is this public good for money. But in the next generation, the first person will get money, but you still have the same amount because you can just reproduce it infinitely, and the other person can also reproduce it infinitely. So it doesn't work the next generation because now the second person can sell just as much as the first one. So the price basically goes to zero. And basically, the issue is the market only works for things that have an exchange value. And if something is non-rivalrous and if it's abundant, there's no exchange. You cannot exchange it for money because the value of it in the market is zero. The exchange value of zero is zero. So that explains this issue right here, why the market is not capable of producing public goods, why it doesn't work for public goods. And the other issue is negative externalities. And negative externalities is also rooted in the market exchange mechanism. And the idea is that when you have an exchange between two people, a seller and a buyer, the only thing that matters is that exchange itself. So if the seller, whatever it takes to produce these goods, it could have a lot of negative externalities, could have effects on climate change, pollution, social polarization. If it's like a media platform, a social media platform, you can create a lot of negative effects on others. But as long as you get money for the product, it doesn't matter for that actual good, and therefore you can still produce it and create all these negative effects. So the question is, well, how do we deal with these things, and how do you deal with like negative externalities, or how do you deal with not being able to produce public goods? And the solution we have at the moment, which is like what's there in the world, is we have government for that. And government basically says, oh, you cannot just create pollution, you cannot create like all these negative externalities. You either have to pay the people, or kind of remedy the situation somehow. Um, which is, maybe it's a solution, but there's still a problem, because if you have these powerful companies, they can influence government. They can say, oh, actually, climate change is not a thing, don't worry about it, or pollution, it's not a big deal. Like it's more important than we produce these things, and that affects government policy also to some extent. And the other question is also for public goods. Government can fund some things, but the question is, well, what does it fund? Can it fund anything? If we have like a crypto project that we think is, very beneficial to people, is government going to say, oh, sure, we'll fund that? So the question for government is, first of all, it's not very effective in how it, even when it puts money towards something, it's not necessarily doing it effectively, and it's wasteful at the same time. So money that goes towards something, not all of it actually ends up going to where it needs to go. And the two other issues is the free rider problem. That if you have, let's say, the U.S. government or any other government, even when they do want to find public goods, question is, well, it's going to benefit other countries also, right? So why do U.S. Taxpayers or any other country's taxpayers have to also fund something that benefit others? And obviously people start saying, well, we don't want to fund these things, and that kind of reduces the level of funding and so on. And as I mentioned before, who decides? So if there might be a lot of good things that government should be putting money toward, but government can put money toward things that a lot of people think is not very useful or not beneficial. So this whole situation obviously is very far from perfect. So we say, well, we need to transform the economy. So even though the economy produces amazing things, like if you see here, like cities and abundance in food production and all these technologies, and we can go to Mars so far with robots, but obviously in the future, be able to put people on Mars and so on. It still has a lot of issues, and we're only creating these things and maybe some public goods, and maybe we're addressing some of the externalities, but to a large extent, there's a lot that we're not getting done. And for these issues, the market also tries to solve the problems, but not necessarily effectively. So market solutions to public goods could be creating artificial scarcity. So instead of, if you have software, for example, you can have software licenses. So even though the software can be available for billions of people, we restrict it, we as in how the market works. The market could say, well, only some people will be able to use it if you pay for it. And patents work the same way, that it can create patent on, medicine or whatever it is, and instead of billions of people being able to access it, only a very small amount in comparison, maybe millions compared to billions, can access it. So a market mechanism can be put in place, but it's incredibly economically inefficient. Again, instead of billions of people, you can have millions of people, maybe thousands of people. The other way the market tries to solve things is through the attention economy, which basically says, since we cannot deal with abundant things, we cannot what we do is we use a proxy for value. So the proxy in the attention economy is, use advertising, for example, and the idea is it's people's attention. So people's attention is limited. There's a limited number of people. There's a limited, number of hours in the day. And if we try to quantify that, then, we can put a market in place for that. So you can have advertisers paying for content that's available for everyone for free. But the problem is that rating and quality is not the same, which basically means that if the content can be something that has a lot of ratings, something that is very viral, but the quality of it could be very low, which is essentially means that you have perverse incentives to increase rating, and a lot of the time it's at the expense of quality, at the expense of producing something good, instead of trying to produce something that a lot of people would want to watch or listen to or whatever it is. And the problem with that is, so a lot of things that generate ratings are things that are outrageous, or things that are, toxic or polarizing. So you have all these perverse incentives to create something that would have a lot of ratings instead of creating a lot of value. So actually, instead of creating public goods, you're creating public bads. You're creating things that hurt people, that polarize society, that create all these again negative externalities. And the things that you can still produce quality things, but they're so small in relation to all the things that are negative, like all these polarizing, hateful content out there, because it's so much easier to create the hateful content and the polarizing content in relation. The things that actually are beneficial are small in comparison, and all the negative externalities kind of make the whole system corrupt and destroy the what it's meant to produce. And then aside from these, you basically have market failure, which basically means it's, even though something is really beneficial to people, since you cannot kind of capture the value of it within the market, which means you cannot make it scarce, or you cannot make some kind of quantity of it scarce through proxy, like attention, there's no system for it at all. So that's the market. And if we look at kind of a scale from scarcity to abundance, we know that in terms of labor, if you have manual labor, it goes more toward something that's scarce, which basically, you're creating things that are easy to quantify. But if it's knowledge, is something that's a lot harder to quantify, and therefore can be more abundant. If you're generating knowledge, a lot of people can benefit from it. But there's problem is that there's less of an ability to capture the value of it in the market. So on the one hand, you have the market economy, which works based on scarcity and profit maximization, and relations are adversarial, which basically you have producers and you have consumers, and you have basically each group. What benefits one group may not benefit another. So, for example, even if you have treatment for cancer, let's say, it seems like, everyone would benefit from it, but not necessarily, because if you're a pharmaceutical company, if the problem is solved, you don't make as much money. So everything that, even though it could be beneficial to most of the people, some people would be hurt within the system. So it's adversarial, it's competitive, unstable and cynical. Cynical, again, as I explained, even though something is very good, it can still hurt some people because that's how the system works. And on the other hand, you have abundance, and basically, it's based on not just profit maximizing, but on the common good, that it benefits everyone, and interests are aligned in that system. And you can have cooperation, not necessarily just conflict and competition, and that also makes the system stable because everyone cooperates and it's for the benefit of everyone in the system, which makes the system stable. And the higher value could be, idealism. You always think, oh, what more can we create? What more can we produce that benefits everyone? But the problem is, as we said, that in the existing system, this doesn't work. We can only do scarcity within the market, and then kind of at the edges, the government can try to address some of the issues. So now we have this new technology out there. We have cryptocurrencies and we have protocols. And there is, this completely new world out there of new systems that may be able to take public goods and fund them in some ways. So we have, under kind of the general umbrella of regenerative economics, we have quadratic funding, retroactive funding, augmented bonding curves. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that. And a lot of other tools. There's DAOs to try to fund public goods. There's all sorts of new mechanisms, new systems that try to address it. But most of these, the point is to fund generalized public goods, which means, could be something in science, could be something in art, could be open source, whatever it is. But all these pretty much require external funding, which means that someone needs to provide the money from some external source, and then these mechanisms kind of can build networks and systems to improve the distribution, that can target distribution in ways that go toward what people prefer over what one company wants. That's, for example, quadratic funding. Retroactive funding works in a different way, also kind of lets the funding go toward not something that a company decides ahead of time, but rather something that is based on its impact eventually, and then there could be some kind of mechanism for people to invest in it. And all these regenerative economics produced tens of millions of dollars going toward public goods. And now we have something a bit different, which is what all these systems are actually based on, with protocols. Bitcoin and Ethereum are obviously, the most well-known ones. There's a lot of other ones, but these systems are based on protocol rewards, or coin inflation. And the idea is the protocol, but the public good that these systems produce are just network security, which means you either pay miners or validators, and they kind of keep the whole network working, that everyone benefits from that you can keep your money on Ethereum or on Bitcoin, and it's secure because you have these miners, or you have these validators making sure that the system runs, and that's to the benefit of everyone. And it's self-sustaining, which means you don't need someone to donate money. It just works through this, through the protocol itself. But there is a market relationship that this protocol, since it produces value to people, since people benefit from it, there's money going in. So there's supply and demand, which facilitates this coin to have value. And that results in hundreds of billions. Basically, if we look at the market cap of Bitcoin and Ethereum, all that money pretty much started by going to mostly miners, even on Ethereum, and now miners and validators. So that's money that went for a public good, for securing the network. So the question is, why can't we use that? Why can't we use this protocol reward system of coin inflation for generalized public goods. And that is basically has been the thinking behind what I'm presenting today. And it's the idea that we can do it. We can take protocol rewards, which basically means the protocol itself generates coins and give it toward instead of miners or validators, you give it to people who produce public goods. So the system that we know in Bitcoin, the way uh, coins are rewarded, the way Bitcoin is rewarded, you start with 50 Bitcoin per block, and over time, basically about every 4 years, that reward halves. And in Ethereum, it's a bit more complicated. It depends on how many people stake coins, and but there's an equation, and basically that's how validators get reward for also securing the network. So the question is, how do we take this mechanism of protocol rewards and apply it to public goods? What should be the reward formula? And the idea is the following, that the reward would be equal to the realized economic impact of the public good, which basically means that the project, whatever public good project it is, could be open source, could be scientific research, medical research, whatever it is, based on what's the actual impact. And since this is open source, this is accessible to everyone, the impact is obviously can be throughout the world, and you can assess the actual economic impact of that project, and based on that you can say this project is, let's say, worth $5 million or whatever it is, and the contributors, those people who contributed toward creating the research or the open source software or whatever it is, can be rewarded through the system. Now it sounds like, that's, anyone can create a system and throw some tokens at people, but why would that ever actually have any value? Which is obviously a very good question, and that's kind of the next thing that we're going to address. So what are the coin dynamics of this system that we're proposing? And the dynamics are as follows. So you have a public goods project, and let's say it has a value, an economic impact of X on the ecosystem, which means, let's say you have an ecosystem of worth $1 billion. People have tokens, throughout the ecosystem, and different projects would have different amounts based on their value. So in this system, each project would have its value, and then you have a new project, and its value would be X in relative to the system. So let's say 1%. So if it's $1 billion, it will be, let's say, worth 10 million. So since it's a public goods project and it's already out there, that basically means that the value of the ecosystem already increased by X, let's say 1%, which means that whatever is the total amount of coins, let's say it's $1 per coin, just for simplicity's sake. So if it's $1 billion and it increased by $1, then every person pretty much just gained 1%. If you don't pay the contributors anything, that's what happens. So the question is, so what should this protocol, how it should compensate the contributor? Basically, if it creates more tokens, it devalues the tokens of everyone else, right? So whatever's, if these people, their value just went up by 1%, if they give some additional tokens to this project, obviously everyone's token is going to go down in value. Well, it's not so simple, actually, because the mechanism in play here is that, well, first of all, people want people to create public goods. They want the ecosystem to grow. They want to actually maximize the growth of the ecosystem. And the only way to do that is if they undervalue this project, if they give it 0 coins or like very little, like half of what it's worth, then people are just not going to produce as much for this ecosystem. They'll just go to another ecosystem. Since it's a crypto project, you can have a lot of ecosystems, so just go somewhere else. On the other hand, you can say, all right, let's just give this project a lot of coins, even more than it's worth. And then that would obviously encourage more people to create, right? Well, not exactly, because then the people who are participating in the ecosystem, they're like, why are you devaluing our coins? Like our coins are losing value. I'll also just sell my coins, go somewhere else. So what happens if we give too much to this project? Again, actually the value of the coin will go down because people were not basically going to say these coins are not maintaining their value. They're just kind of just printing coins in unlimited fashion, and it's not stable. So there is actually an equilibrium value at which you realize maximum economic growth and also preserve the coin value. And that value is the equilibrium value. So if you give the project that contributed X, like the economic impact to the ecosystem, if it's 1% and the project gets 1% of the tokens, then you preserve the value of every token. So just as it started, it's going to be worth the same amount. But of course, now the ecosystem is improved. The ecosystem grew. There's production of new public goods, and the people who contributed it, they get compensated fairly for what they produce. And next, more people are going to want to contribute to the system because they know that the system values projects fairly, and basically this incentivizes contributors to do their best and to maximize their impact, and it incentivizes validators, the people who are going to review these projects, to be as accurate as possible. Again, because they don't want to undervalue, they don't want to overvalue, they want to value exactly how much the project is worth. And everyone in the ecosystem wants to preserve the value of their coins, obviously, and therefore they have an interest in making sure also that the validators are doing an accurate job. And that creates a public goods stablecoin. It's not exactly a stablecoin because what it's kind of pegged to is a unit of public good. If you think about it, like if whatever is that unit, if one public good is worth X and another public good is worth 10 times that much, then that other project will get 10 times the amount of coins, and the value is going to be preserved. So that's what it's kind of stablecoin, but not exactly. But the idea is that the value of the coin is preserved. And this whole system, of course, it's not just a DAO or it's not something like that. It has to be a consensus mechanism, which means that anyone who enters the ecosystem has to be able to see what's going on, to see why a project got this much funding, and why another project got more, why some projects got less, and so on. So this proof of impact consensus mechanism is kind of what I wanted to introduce. And this is what can allow crypto, what could allow Web3 to fund public goods at scale, which means that any public good, again, could be scientific research, could be investigative journalism, could be open source content, could be open source code. This mechanism would allow funding it in a way that is transparent, in a way that people can review, just like you can review, like a Bitcoin ledger or Ethereum. You know that this system works, and this explains how. So let me just go quickly through it. You have contributors who create a public goods project. the next step is the actual consensus mechanism. So how does it work? It starts with an estimator who proposes the project's estimated impact. And the estimator could be anyone, doesn't necessarily have to be the contributor. Some individual who looks at a project thinks this thing should be worth something, probably worth a lot, because the estimator also wants to make some kind of profit. And the profit is based on their estimate, which means that the idea is that, the person takes a risk. He's looking at a project, he's reviewing it, and that he or she, of course, and they need to put money and provide funding for all the people who are gonna review it. And the reason they would want to provide this funding is because they would have some profit based on if the project is actually worth it, is actually close to the estimate. If the project is actually worth less, then they're gonna lose this money. So they again want to be accurate in the review because you cannot just throw money out there for any project. If the project is not really worth it, you're gonna lose money. So that's part of the risk. That's part of the reward. And then you have an initial review, which means that people look at the estimate, they consider if it makes sense, if this is kind of not a full review, just kind of a preliminary review to see if resources should be dedicated to this project to be reviewed. So if it's a very big project, let's say if it's something it could be worth $10 million, you need enough expertise going toward reviewing this project, because you cannot just have, let's say, one person who's just has some very basic understanding of the project. You cannot have that. You need a lot of people reviewing it, and therefore you need a lot of money going toward the review process. And that's relative to the estimated impact. And then you have an estimated impact validation process, and then, but that's just estimated. And after you have an estimate, you then have a periodic realized impact, which means that, it could be whatever is, let's say it's a research project that says, this thing can cure some disease. Okay, so you have the research, but what's the actual result? Did it actually cure, X amount of people? And only once it actually has realized impact in the world, then you can say, all right, we have this many people cured compared to what the project said. Therefore, this is how much money should actually go toward it. So it's not just putting, some idea or project out there. It actually has to show realized impact. And then just looking at what an estimated impact validation would look like. So you have two groups. One is an expert group, which basically means that whatever is the subject, or whatever is the topic to be reviewed. Let's say this is in medicine, so you need people who at least understand what this is about, have some knowledge of medicine, so they can actually review the project. And the question is, well, where is their expertise? What is it based? Where does it come from? And this is based on expertise, domain-specific expertise, SBTs, soul-bound tokens. And the idea is that only people who actually have expertise in a subject, they can review as experts the project. But then after their review, you kind of go to a wider ecosystem, which is basically anyone can look at the expert opinion and say, oh, I agree with this, I don't agree with this. And based on that, they can say, all right, the experts say this is worth this much. I think they're correct in their review of the project, but I think actually it's worth a bit less. And that's why the ecosystem wide validators, that's where they come in. and they kind of balance out the expert, because obviously every expert field thinks that their field is, the most incredible, the most influential, the most valuable. So you need like an ecosystem wide way to balance out. And what's important is that everyone here, everyone, including the estimator, including the validators, they all follow still this dynamic, which means that they all want an accurate evaluation, because if they all have, they're all part of this ecosystem, and therefore they don't want to lose. They have um, a vested interest in maintaining the value of their coins. Therefore, they want an accurate review. And after this review, you have a challenge period. Let me just go a step back and say that these individuals, again, the expertise, how much expertise is required for a project depends on what's the estimated impact. If it's a lot of, like if it's high impact estimate, then you're going to need a lot of experts. If it's low impact, obviously the reverse. And these people are selected at random from the entire ecosystem. So these are selected based on their expertise, and these are selected completely at random. And the reason you want random selection is because you don't want people to be able to game the system. So again, this whole mechanism, it has to be to demonstrate that this system actually works. So you cannot have, if it's easy to manipulate, if it's easy to game the system, if it's easy to get some results, then the system just doesn't work. It's useless. So that's why there's a whole bunch of in place and a whole bunch of incentive alignment in place to make sure that that the results are credible. So after people are randomly selected, and they also have to stake some of the money. So if they're expected to make, let's say, 30 coins, maybe they have to stake 10 of them, and they stake it for a certain period where anyone can challenge the results. And again, the point is that that prevents Sybil attacks, that prevents people from just putting random results out there because and hoping, doesn't matter what my review is, I'll still get the reward. No, it doesn't work that way. The point is that the review has to be credible, and that's why you have a challenge period where anyone can challenge the results. And only after the challenge period is done, then the coins are released for the validators. And then if this process is done and this process is done, which this process works pretty similarly to the initial one, to the next, which is funding distribution. And it also has to work through consensus. So again, any project, any public goods project, you have a whole bunch of, usually, a whole bunch of people working on it, but it also has other influences. Like if it's an open source project, usually you have a whole bunch of dependencies, which is other projects. People worked on developing other systems. And if this project depends on a whole bunch of other projects, those projects also deserve some credit for what this project created. So the idea here is that the people, each person should be compensated based on their contribution. If someone contributed a lot, they should be compensated more than someone who contributed just a very little. And the same for the projects that the public good is based on. If some project was very influential toward producing this public good, then that project should get the reward for it. And if someone, other project contributes just a little, same thing. And this thing, there has to be a consensus between all the people who contributed, and also influences. So even though only the people within this group can decide, they still have to be fair to the influences, because anyone can challenge this. So if there's no consensus, which means that there's someone who challenges the consensus, then the funding is eventually gonna be delayed. So you want a consensus, you want everyone to get their fair share, and after you achieve consensus, so after the main consensus is achieved of the funding and then the distribution, then the funding can be issued to those who contributed and the influences. And once this is done, also the estimator is going to get some money because of his or her work and risk and so on. And the funding, what's issued is actual coins and also expertise SBTs. And that's how each of these people, they're going to get, not the influencers, but the contributors are going to get expertise tokens, which are then can be used for this system, where that basically they can become validators, and then based on the person's expertise, that's how the validation is determined. Basically, it's weighted for the validation, and the idea is that like you can't just buy coins and then have a lot of influence in the system. The only way to get influence, which means to be able to review projects, is if you have real expertise, if you basically actually contributed. So that again keeps the whole system secure and credible, which means that this process could actually work, could actually result in real value as opposed to just random tokens being minted because some group decided that someone deserves coins or something like that. So any product you have to, even though you have coins, the question is why would the coins have value? And we already discussed at length how the supply part works, which is coins are issued based on proof of impact consensus. But why would there be demand for these coins? And the answer is, well, first of all, if you're doing the estimation or the validation or investment, which I did not discuss yet, I can mention it a bit, or if you want to challenge the project, all these, as I show, you need to stake some funding, you need to put funding toward it. And because of that, there is demand for these coins if you want to participate in this ecosystem. The other issue is innovation attraction. So basically, a lot of different people can create a public goods project. And since the system, of course, has limited resources to review, who are they going to prioritize? And of course, they're going to prioritize whatever helps the actual ecosystem the most first, and other projects, of course, will be later on. So if people want their field to be more represented in, and they want more public goods created toward their field, they want to become part of this ecosystem. And that's why they would want coins. And finally, this idea of an advanced medium of exchange. So, we have Bitcoin and Ethereum, which are not yet mediums of exchange because there's an issue of scaling, there's all these issues. And the idea here is that if you want coins to actually, if you want the currency to actually be used as a medium of exchange, you need to kind of improve the protocol, improve the system a lot. And that requires a lot of research, a lot of work going toward that. And this system allows that because there is a funding mechanism for public goods. And improving the protocol is a public good. Therefore, there's going to be a continuous work to improve this protocol, which means that you can have a really advanced system that is fast and convenient and that people want to use as a medium of exchange. That they, there could be a lot of tooling for it. It could be this could be a system that's a lot better than using cash or using credit cards, because it could be a lot of innovation going toward that. So that's another attractor to actually use this system. And just to summarize more briefly and to point out a few important things about this protocol, validation data needs to be publicly available. So basically, whatever is the project that is under review, it has to actually have data publicly available. It can't be just one person providing this data, because the person could just fake the data, and that means that people can't really review the project. They cannot trust that one person providing all the data. But if the data is provided from decentralized sources, then there's a lot more trust, and once the data is reliable, then the project can be reviewed. And validators, the system needs to have enough expertise for a project to receive full funding. So if there's not enough expertise in a certain field, there's no way for that project to be funded, because obviously it just doesn't meet the requirements. So again, this is something that needs to build capacity over time. But just a few other points. The protocol offers a comprehensive solution for the problem of public goods, and it solves the free rider problem, because everyone in the ecosystem contributes by the coin inflation, but the system is maintained. So everyone in the system, there's no free riders. And if someone is outside the ecosystem, they're still not really free riders, because their coins, which are equal to zero, the inflation also affects them. So zero turns into zero, and they have basically the same level as everyone else. The system is fully decentralized, so there's no one controls this mechanism outside of the protocol itself. And it works in a decentralized way. It distributes expertise and distributes funding completely in the same way Bitcoin would be distributed. It's not controlled by any individual, and it's meritocratic governance. So again, this is based on expertise. It's not based on people just buying their way into the system. If doesn't matter how many coins you own, if you don't actually have expertise by actually going through this process or through the validation process, you cannot have any influence in that system. And just a few more points for common goods. So not every good out there benefits everyone in the world. If it's a public park, it's more local. There's a lot of local things, if it's based on a global system, it's unlikely to be able to fund this local thing. But you can have local and community currencies that work the same way as this, but it could be distributed just to this local community, and there could be their own governance system of what gives value to that coin. And then you can also fund common goods. You can also fund parks and street lights or whatever it is through this mechanism. So that's why it's comprehensive, both for kind of global public goods, and also there's a way to do it for common goods. Much of the consensus mechanism can be automated over time. So we looked at all this, but the process of actually improving the mechanism, a lot of it could be automated. A lot of it could, gathering information and reviewing it. Some of it could be done through AI, as long as it's all kind of can be validated, can be reviewed, and so on. But there's a way to kind of make it not as resource intensive over time, and that's kind of part of the vision of this protocol. And it creates a decentralized public sphere. So the idea is that it's no longer the private sphere, which is the market economy, and public sphere, which is kind of by government. Here you have a decentralized public sphere, which means that no one controls it, but people can actually work in it or can contribute to knowledge and stuff like that. And because it's public, it's basically for the public good, which means that people can work literally to benefit society and not depend on any group or individual for funding, but instead through the protocol funding for the doing. And it's the system is Sybil resistant. There's a lot of mechanisms. This is a very simplified version of the system. There's obviously a white paper and so on for this, but the idea is that a lot of bad to counteract bad actors, to counteract collusion between members and so on. There's mechanisms in place to address that. Some issues, of course. I'd love to get everyone who heard the lecture. I do want to make it more interactive, but hopefully depends on the time allowed. Um, so I would like to get feedback, and obviously this is not perfect by any means, and this mechanism needs a lot of research and improvement, and also testing and development. There is already it's already on a test net, like an earlier version of the system, at least parts of it. So this still needs a lot of work and community outreach. This project, it's worthless if no one knows about it. And hopefully, it's not just about the protocol itself, but the possibility of what this allows, the idea of a generalized public goods system that works through on a protocol level. I think it's a very powerful idea and can benefit a lot of people. So if anyone, that's pretty much the end of this. Just a quick one. So if we showed before, we had this, negative externalities and what cannot be provided.
Established.
So the idea is that through crypto, we can make a market economy that's still fully functional, but we can also fund public goods and deal with the externalities. So the externalities are kind of internalized and basically either avoided or kind of those who are affected can be compensated. And then we can produce everything that people want. And that's the idea of the abundance economy. Thank you. If anyone has questions, I'd love to answer. It's pretty much the end of the lecture.
Okay, that was really interesting, Mike.
Thank you.
I don't know if I have a question or probably to recap the idea about the evaluation you mentioned.
Mhm.
So how is that something that you consider? I know you mentioned that probably it is possible to automate, but at the beginning I thought it is like more manual, right? Like it requires um, yeah, people to actually select the validators, for example.
So the protocol itself selects the validator.
Oh,
If you want to be a validator, you can say I want to be a general validator, which means it's like an ecosystem wide. And also you can say I want to be an expert validator. And then there's kind of a pool of validators, and from that pool, the protocol selects at random who will be validating any given project. So that's the idea. So the selection is through the protocol, but the actual people do have to do like actual, review of the project.
okay. And that's the challenge part.
Yes, that's one.
Okay.
Yeah, part of the challenge is
Um,
first of all because it's resource intensive. Actual like people have to put work into it, but obviously you get compensated for the work. That's what the validation is. You validate and then you get reward coins for this validation. So basically like like work. Um, but the challenge is improving this mechanism. I don't think it's perfect. Like I'm sure there's a lot of things that can be further improved, like kind of maybe shortened or truncated or just rearranged, or other mechanisms can be added in place to improve the system more. So that's kind of what needs to you know would really contribute to toward making this better.
Okay, okay, thanks for clarifying.
Sure.
I don't know if
Yeah,
someone else has a question. Okay, go ahead.
super fast. Mike, that was super fascinating. This is really exciting. You mentioned you'd cover a little bit about the investing aspect.
Yeah.
Do you mind touching on that real fast?
Sure. So the idea, yeah, I did forget to actually, talk about it. So the idea is that once you have an estimate before money is actually released, so a project can, someone can kind of propose a project and say, well, I think this can, do X, like this can cure something. And then there's again this review process of experts can look at the proposal and say, yes, we believe if you do this research, it could result in so much impact. And then once you have this estimate, um, the person who wants to do the research, you can say, well, I'm expected to make this much money. Who wants to invest in this project for a certain percentage of the overall return? So we can actually do the research. So you don't get money just for proposing something. You get money once there is results. But to actually be able to create whatever it is, the public good, sometimes you need investment in it. And once people know that there is expected impact, then you can create an investment mechanism through that. Or not necessarily investment, people can also just donate money, but knowing that they're donating towards something that's going to be impactful. So that's also,
I
does
see.
that
That's
does that
awesome.
answer?
No, that makes sense. Thank you.
Sure. Anyone
I'm
else?
curious on like the sort of the roadmap or like how far you guys are along. I read about these protocols. I've never met anyone who actually created one. So I just you're like a wizard. Like how long does something like this take?
So I've been working on, I mean, I've been in crypto in about 2 years or so, and I into crypto because of like I saw potential in it, in doing something like this. But the issue is, as I see it now, it's really the community outreach that we can build the whole thing, but if no one uses it, then there's no point. And I feel that the issue right now is that we're so early with the idea itself, which means that if people don't really even understand what it is, then there's no point in putting so much resources into building it because no one's going to use it. So we do already have stuff on GitHub, and there's a website that's buildingweb4.io. If you go there, I can probably put it in the chat. But basically, if you go there, there's already a very preliminary version of some of the smart contracts that could enable something like this protocol, and it's running on the Polygon testnet. So we already have something there, but right now we're focused on the community outreach, on kind of explaining the potential of, and again, it's not so much about this specific protocol. It's about, for me at least, it's about the potential of crypto to be able to actually change, improve the economy. That's what I really care about. Like, I don't care if, the specific protocol I'm working on, if it succeeds or not. I care about the actual, overall impact that this can have in the world. And for that, you need people to actually be interested in it, to want to contribute to it, to want to see this happen. So that's kind of so the roadmap, as you said, we already have something on the test net. We want to build the community around it. We want to build, kind of be able to work towards actually realizing it, which means we need kind of group of people who are interested in building it, promoting it, making it into reality. How long it's going to take? To be honest, I think the coding is not the big deal because I think it's not too complex, and because you have these incentive mechanisms in place that kind of build on each other, you can kind of make it faster if enough people work on it. So I would say, just maybe a year to kind of put bare bones structure. We already have something basic out there, as I said, but getting the idea out there, at least that has been the main challenge, and just putting it in kind of digestible. Uh, it even took me about a year to be able to explain it to myself, how the system works. So it's not easy, and I'm sure I talk to people who I discuss this with them for months, and they still don't completely get it. So that's part of the challenge of like explaining it and building it, is a bit less of a challenge, I feel.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Sure. Anything else? Any questions?
I think there's no more questions.
All right.
And we're
All
at
right.
the top of the hour, so probably we can wrap up.
Yep. Thank you so much. Thank you for the Unconference, for hosting me, and I had a lot of time, a lot of fun listening to a lot of the other projects, and it's been a joy so far. So thank you so much.
No, thank you so much. You make it possible. All the participants are the ones that are making this Transactional Conference possible. So thank you so much. And thank you all for joining. And well, have a great rest of your day, night, evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.